We'll listen to the recording. But I want to get started because it's a very long daf, so I don't think it's possible to wait too long. So let us start. Today's daf is daf Nun Daled 54 in Masechet Sanhedrin. And I'm going to go pretty quickly. It's a very long daf. We actually did outside, basically, did a large part of it yesterday. But today we'll repeat it. It says the Gemara, the first word on daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph, Tanya Kavatei de Rava. It's a brayso that supports Rava. Rava had a very detailed and elegant explanation of the psukim yesterday, where it says in one place in Achrimot, it talks about ervat avicha vervat imcha, person's father and mother, and we understood that to mean, according to Rava, that according to Rabbi Yehuda in Rava, that it was ervat avicha was eshet avicha, the wife of the father, and then in Kiddushim it talks about ervat eshet avicha. And that clearly means the wife of the father. And he made a gzera shavi, compared the two, that you learn everything out from one to the other. So let's read that all in a brayta. Tani kavati de Rava, ish. Says a person, probably katan. Not true about a minor. Asher yishkavet eshet aviv, who sleeps, this is the pasuk in Kiddushim, the punishment, sleeps with his father's wife. Mashma, I would learn from there, bein eshet aviv shehi imo, whether his father's wife happens to be his mother, or whether his father's wife is not his mother, it's a stepmother, bein eshet aviv shelo imo. How do I know a mother, imo she'eno eshet aviv? Let's say the father and mother had the child out of wedlock, right, or anusa, and his mother is not his father's wife. Minayin that's a prohibition as well. Talmud lomar ervat aviv gila. That pasuk is mufna, is extra. Put it aside so that we can make a gzera shava, hakish. Sorry, not a gzera shava, a hekish. Make a hekish. Uledomi. I got it right. Uledomi menu gzera shava, to make a gzera shava. Now the pasuk finishes in Kedoshim. It says mot yum tu, you kill them, and we say in the brayta that means beskila. And as we always say, how do you know it means beskila? Oh, Miriam, I'm just about to get started on my own.
You
ready?
did call it yesterday. You said it was going to be you and I. I'm too late for my class, so I might as well
Okay, let's
shot.
do it. It's a long daf. Let's go from the top. I just started. We'll start again. Tanya
Awesome.
Kavatei de Rava. First words on the line. There's a brayta that supports the Rava's explanation yesterday. Remember of this complicated ervat aviv, which meant, according to Rava and Rabbi Yehuda, the wife of the father in Achremot. Then it says the wife of the father very explicitly in Kiddushim, and he made a gzera shava from one to the other. So we're going to read all that inside. Says the brayta exactly as Rava said, and this is a brayta that we assume is, Rashi points out, is Rabbi Yehuda, because it's in the Safra, and the Stam Safra is Rabbi Yehuda. Ish, a person, meaning probably katan, not a minor. Asher yishkavet eshet aviv, this again is the punishment in Kiddushim, who sleeps with his father's wife. That implies mashma bein eshet aviv she imo, bein eshet aviv shlo imo. Doesn't say anything about mother. It says father's wife. How would you know an imo, she'eno eshet aviv minayin, if it's his mother and it's not his father's wife because it was outside of wedlock, right? Outside of a marriage. Talmud lomar ervat aviv gila. So it repeats the words ervat aviv gila in Kedoshim. That's mufna. That's extra. Lakish uladam menu gzera shava. And we'll see in a little bit what that gzera shava is, but I'll give it away. Gzera shava is you compare eshet aviv here to ervat avicha in Achremot, which according to Rabbi Yehuda means eshet aviv too. And just like in Achremot, it said ervat avicha ve'ervat imcha, so mother is included. Here too in Kedoshim, mother is included. Then the pasuk says mot yum tu, you kill them. Biskila, that means you stone them. Ask the bright Atomer Beskila doesn't say skila. And as we said yesterday and many times, Nemerkan Demehem Bum, the code word is their blood is on them. And Nemer Ba'ovi Yidoni Demehem Bum, Malahalan Beskila, Afkan Beskila. Okay, that is how we understand according to Rabbi Yehuda, the pasuk in Kedoshim. But that's the punishment. Onesh Shemanu. How about Azara Minayin? Remember, you always need to have a separate warning. Talmud Lomar. Now we get back to Achrimot, where it says ervat avicha lo tegala, and says the brayta ervat avicha zu eshet avicha. Ask the brayta at omer eshet avicha. How do you know that when it says don't sleep with your father or your father's erva, it means your father's wife? Maybe eno el ervat avicha mamash. So nemer kan ervat avicha lo tegala, because it says here ervat avicha lo tegala. But nemer lahalan, the pasuk we just quoted in Kedoshim, ervat aviv gila, right? That you exposed your father's erva, but the beginning of that pasuk was don't sleep with your father's wife. Right, just like there, Malalan, it was clearly, explicitly said, "Beishuta katov medaber." I was talking about your father's wife. Afkan beishuta katov medaber. Here too, ervat avicha means your father's wife. Now that's mashma when it says ervat avicha meaning your father's wife, bein eshet aviv she imo, bein eshet aviv she'eno imo, right? In the warning, I know it's the father's wife, whether it's your mother or not. Imo she'eno eshet aviv minayin. How do you know a mother who's not a father's wife? Well, it's a good thing. The next words are ervat avicha ve'ervat imcha, right? Talmud Lomer ervat imcha lo tegaleh. So therefore, it explicitly says mother in the Azhara. Ask the Braita, against a little repetitive, but so the Braita explains it. Ainli ela ba'azhara. We only know that in terms of the prohibition, asa akatuv, imo she'eno eshet aviv ki imo she'eshet aviv, that it made a mother who's not a father's wife like a mother is a father's wife. Onesh minayin, and this is the Gzera Shava. Nemar kan ervat avicha lo tegala in Kedoshim. V'nemar lahalan ervat aviv gila ma v'azhara asa katuv imo she'eno eshet aviv ki imo she'eshet aviv. Just like by the warning, it explicitly says ervat avicha ve'ervat imcha that they are equivalent. Af be'onesh, where it doesn't say it, we learn out from the Gzera Shava asa katuv imo she'eno eshet aviv ki imo she'hi eshet aviv. So that is how we know, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Stam Safra, how we know, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that a mother is prohibited. The Torah says mother's prohibited, but how we know a mother gets punished as well. Okay? Let me just do this. Okay. Sorry, 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what about the next pasuk, right? Because it says ervat avicha, ervat imcha, lo tegaleh, ervat hina, right? Then it says imchahi. What do we do with imchahi? And this is what Rabbi Yehuda says in the Braita, and Rav quoted yesterday, and Abaye quoted it, Mishum imo atam mechayvo v'atam mechayvo mishum eshetav. If there's two, right, if the woman is both your father's wife and your mother, and you do a b'shogeg, you only bring one karban because imchahi, the maternal relationship is primary. Now that's Rabbi Yehuda, this whole Braita that we just quoted. What about the Rabbanan? The Rabbanan disagree with the whole thing, right? So the Rabbanan say, Ervat avicha means mamash. It means don't sleep with your father. Says, why do you need a pasuk for that? Haimivet zachar nafka, right? Your father's a male, so you can't sleep with him anyways. Well, that's not a good question. We always have multiple isurim on one person. The chayav alav shtayim. It's to be chayav two. Because Rabbi Yehuda, as Rabbi Yehuda the Amora said, Dam Rabbi Yehuda nachri. Now, the Gemara is going to explain in a second. This does not mean a nachri; it means a Jew. But we don't want to say it about a Jew, so we say a non-Jew who did this. Haba al aviv, who slept, with his father. Chayav shtayim. You're chayav two, one for father and one for zachar. And haba achi aviv, you sleep with if the man sleeps with his uncle, then also chayav shtayim, because you're not allowed to sleep. Torah says, don't sleep with your father's brother, right? Which again could mean his wife, but we say means literally. Amar Rava. Now Rava said, the Mistavra, it seems logical that Milta de Rav Yehuda, that Rav Yehuda is not talking about a non-Jew, a Nachri. He must be talking about Yisrael, and he's talking about where you did it b'shogeg, right? And you slept with them by mistake, and the question is how many karbanot do you bring? The karban, right? Because obviously you don't kill someone twice, as we all know. V'haidika amri nachri, he said a nachri because lishnam al he wanted to say something that doesn't make it sound like it's applying to a Jew. Nachri mamash. Now, if he was literally talking about a non-Jew, and you're talking about a situation where the non-Jews live under Jewish control and we punish them, all those theoreticals, but still, Dino Mayninu Katala, you'd always kill, and the halacha, we're going to have this later, the halacha is that you would always punish a non-Jew with Katala, even if they do it b'shogeg, right? So there's no concept of karban by a non-Jew. So
Right.
they do something, that's the punishment.
That's
So
that.
if they're going to kill them, betray katali, you chayv shtayim. There's such thing as killing someone twice. So it must be that he was really referring to a Jew and a karban. And Tayanami hachi. In fact, there's a Braita that says that explicitly. Haba al aviv, a person who sleeps with their father, chayv shtayim, and clearly it's referring to a karban. That's how you can have two, meaning you did it b'shogeg. Haba al achi aviv chayv shtayim. Now, that's the Braita. Ikad Amri, some in the Beit Midrash said that that's not like Rabbi Yehuda, right? Because Rabbi Yehuda, if you recall, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda said that the word ervat avicha is not don't sleep with your father, it was don't sleep with your father's wife. So there isn't a second prohibition on sleeping with your father. But some say, Ikad Amri, that even Rabbi Yehuda would agree. Afilu Rabbi Yehuda, what's the source? The pasuk ervat avicha is not the source. So what is the source? Ma'itele b'kal v'chomer mi'achi aviv. He would bring it from a kal v'chomer, from a father's brother, which everybody agrees is literal. And so it's saying, don't sleep with your father's brother. Obviously, it's a man, so they'd be chayv twice. And Rabbi Yehuda might have a kal v'chomer that says the following: Ma achi aviv, your father's brother, the only reason he's your relationship is because of your father, right? The kurva da avivu, and your chayiv shtayim. So a father is even closer to you, aviv lo kol shekain, and that machloket would be kamiflagi beplukta de Abaya v'Rava. That would be dependent on the machloket Abaya and Rava, the mar savar on shimin hadin or mar savar on shimin hadin. The machloket Abaya and Rava about whether you can actually use the kal v'chomer to have a punishment. Right? Some say the Torah says something, you can use the Kal V'chomer, say it's prohibited, but you'll never punish a person based on a Kal V'chomer, and that is the machloket. Okay, so that is the first part. Good morning, Robert. That's the first part, okay? That Rabbi Yehuda has got this whole beautiful limud about how you know that a father's wife is prohibited, a mother is prohibited, you're chayav only one if you sleep with a mother who's also the father's wife because of the pasuk imchahi, right? And you know about the punishment from the Gzera Shava that whatever happens in Achrei Mot, the same thing happens in Kedoshim. In Achrei Mot, the mother and the stepmother are in the same category. So in Kedoshim, the mother and stepmother are in the same category. Ask the Gemara though, that's great. That's great Gzera Shava according to Rabbi Yehuda. But what about the Rabbanan? The Rabbanan don't have the Gzera Shava. So how do the Rabbanan read all these psukim and how do they know all the halachot that Rabbi Yehuda just arrived? So that's the Gemara of Rabbanan. We are almost, I guess, around halfway down, a little more. Azhara le'ishat aviv minalu. How do they know that a father's wife is prohibited, right? Because the pasuk says you kill someone if they sleep with the father's wife, but it never says that you can't do it. All it says is ervat avicha, right? According to Rav Yehuda, ervat avicha meant don't sleep with your father's wife. But according to the Chachamim, that ervat avicha means don't sleep with your father. How do you know you can't sleep with your father's wife? So ask the Gemara, Rabbanan Azhara le'ishat aviv minale. Nafgale, they learned it out from the pasuk which says ervat eshet avicha lo tegaleh. They learned it out from the pasuk which says, don't reveal this explicit pasuk, don't be megale ervat eshet avicha. Okay, that pasuk seems to say it. Rabbi Yehuda, ahumi baile, that says Rabbi Yehuda is needed for another halacha. Because what about, remember we said in the Mishnah, a father's wife, what if the father dies? You still can't sleep with her because even though the first person's father is dead, and clearly it's not his wife anymore, it's still prohibited. So Rabbi Yehuda says that extra pasuk is telling you le'azhara le'ishat aviv lachar mitah, that you need to know that the father's wife remains prohibited after the father dies. Rabbanan say, well, I know that miseifa dekra nafka because it says ervat avicha hi. Remember in Kedoshim it says ervat eshet avicha lo tegaleh ervat avicha hi. So the repetitive part, it's your father's erva, is telling you even if your father's dead. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, I need that to tell you mishum eshet avata mechayvo v'yata mechayvo mishum eshet ish. Says Rabbi Yehuda, I learned a whole new halacha. I already told you that you can't be chayav on a mother who's also a father's wife. But you know what I'm telling you now, says Rabbi Yehuda, that a father's wife who's married to your father is not chayav twice for being a father's wife and an eshet ish. You're only chayav for ervat avicha, not for eshet ish. Says Gemara, it goes against our Mishnah yesterday. Remember our Mishnah yesterday said literally, explicitly, haba al eshet aviv, chayav shtayim, right? You're chayav for nishum eshet av, mishum eshet ish. And Rabbi Yehuda didn't argue with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda didn't say anything. Ba'anan asked the Gemara, but we learned in our Mishnah yesterday, haba al eshet av, chayav alem mishum eshet av, and mishum eshet ish. And remember, we concluded bein b'chayav aviv, bein lachar mitat aviv, in terms of the isser of eshet av. V'lo palag Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda never argued. Rabbi, well, that's because he didn't argue in the Mishnah, but palag b'braita. There must be a braita. It's not so clear if we know about this braita. There must be a braita where Rabbi Yehuda argues. So Rabbi Yehuda has a second halacha from ervat avichahi to say that if a woman is a father's wife and married to the father's still alive, and he sleeps with his stepmother, he's only chayiv for ervat avicha, not for eshet ish. And the Rabbanan, okay, fine. So that's that machloket. Rabbanan now, we're the first one on the line, around 15 lines from the bottom. How do the Rabbanan know that you punish a person who sleeps with his father's wife after the father dies, right? The widow of his father. So Bishma Rabbi Yehuda might be Gzera Shava. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, whatever applies to the mother, whatever applies in Achrei Mot, in the warning applies in the punishment, right? And so in Achrei Mot, we learned out from the extra pasuk of Ervat Avicha Hi, Ervat Eshet Imcha Hi, sorry, that Ervat Eshet Imcha, that you includes it after death. So El Rabbanan Minalu, how do the Rabbanan know that? So Amri Lecha, they would say to you, Hahu ervat avicha gila, right? The pasuk of ervat avicha gila, the mapikle Rabbi Yehuda l'gzera shava. Rabbi Yehuda said this was extra to tell you gzera shava, and you're comparing achrimot to kedoshim. We don't have the gzera shava. So mapikle inu laonish eshet aviv lachar mita. That is how we would know the punishment for eshet aviv achar mita. So basically, depending on how you use the psukim, you're going to have extra psukim to do it. There's only one problem here. And the one problem is the one case we don't, I mean, there's probably more than one problem, but the one that we haven't resolved is what about a mother and the punishment, right? Remember, it never says in Parashat Kedoshim, don't sleep with your mother, and if you do, you'll get killed. It says it in Achrimot, don't sleep with the mother, right? In Kedoshim, it just says mother, stepmother. It doesn't say mother, right? So how do you know that there's a punishment, a skila, for someone sleeping with their mother who is not their father's wife? So Rabbi Yehuda learned it out from the Gzera Shava, that since the mother and stepmother are comparable in Achrimot, they're comparable in Kedoshim. But according to the Chachamim who don't have the Gzera Shava, how do you know about an Onesh for a mother who is not a stepmother? So let's read that inside. V'Rabbanan, Onesh le'imo, she'eno eshet aviv minalo. How do they know that there's a punishment, and you have to repeat it, and that you actually give skila to the person who sleeps with their mother, who's not his stepmother? And that's where we quoted this yesterday. Amar Rav Shesha Breder of Idi. This is the famous Rav Shesha Breder of Idi. Amar Kra Imchahi. It says the word Imchahi in Achrimot. It says the word Imchahi, but that's extra, and that's telling you Asa Hakatuv li'imo. It makes a mother she'eno eshet aviv ki'imo she eshet aviv. It's an extra pasuk to say that a mother who is not a stepmother is the same as a mother who is a stepmother. And so the word imchahi, according to the Chachamim, in the interpretation of Rav Ashisha Breda of Idi, is to tell you that a mother who's not a stepmother is the same as a mother who is a stepmother. And just like a mother who is a stepmother, the Torah explicitly says you kill her, or kill him and her, so too by a mother who's not a stepmother. Now, of course, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need this pasuk of imchahi because he learns it from Gzera Shava. So what does he do with imchahi? And that's how we started the whole sugya. He uses imchahi to tell you that if she's a mother and a stepmother, you're only chayiv one time because she's only your mother relationship that you care about. So it turns out that basically, as Rava put it very succinctly yesterday, and this Breita now all day today, that depending on how you understand the first word of the pasuk of don't sleep with your father, does that mean your father's mother, in which case there's a whole extra comparison of father's mother to mother, or does it literally mean father, in which case you don't have that, and you have to come up with all the limudim of the Chachamim. So that
Do
is
we
the,
assume that this happened like a lot, that they had to expound so much about it?
I don't
Or
think it
is it
happened ever.
really what?
I doubt it happened ever, right? I mean,
Right, okay. So
I mean, yeah. So yeah, Rosa asked the same problem yesterday. I mean, look, the interesting thing about this, you can ask why. I can't tell you why, but the psukim are very. You read these psukim in Achrimot and Kedoshim, and you wonder, like, what's going on? Why
right.
do we use the same words and the same things, right? The Torah constantly changing the relationship and the words, and and so you have to then, of course, start unpacking that. And that's what this whole sifra that we just read, the whole first part of today's daf, is really understanding the nuances between how it's described in Achrimot, how it's described in Kedoshim, and what to make of those details. But there's a lot of, again, I would say practical. There are halachic implications of after the father's death, of if he's married, right? Are you chayiv twice? Like, again, did it ever happen? I'm not really sure, but that's practical. Well, we're going to get to less common too, so don't get too. Continues the Gemara about Kalato. We said in the Mishnah, you're chayiv twice. You're chayiv for Kalato and you're chayiv for Eshadish. Ask the Gemara, why aren't you chayiv also for your son's wife? Because the pasuk says, right, Erbat Kalatcha lo tegaleh, Erbat binchahi. So why don't you call it Erbat Kalatcha and Erbat your ben? The chayiv nam mishum Eshet beno. Amar Baya patacha katuv b'Kalato b'sayim b'Eshet beno. The Torah says in one pasuk, Kalato and Eshet Beno, to tell you that's the same thing. There's no two limudim. Lomar lecha zui kalato zui Eshet Beno. So it's only one chiyuv. Okay, so that is the first Mishnah. Says the second Mishnah now today, 8 lines from the bottom. The next cases we discussed are haba al hazachor, a man who sleeps with another man, or al habehema, or sleeps with a animal, or a woman, isha miviat habehema aleh, not add that word. So Isha Meviat Behema, she is, you could say passive, but she's the one who sleeps with the animal. Those people and the animal get skila. Okay. Ask the Gemara, Im Adam Chata Behema Machata. Well, you can't blame the animal. The animal didn't have any free will or choice in this. Elefi Shaba Adam Takala Yada, because the person is going to get killed by sleeping with this animal. Lefikach Amar Katuf Tisakel. Therefore, they said the animal, although it didn't choose to do it, it contributed to this avera, and therefore the animal gets killed. Another explanation. It'd be terribly embarrassing, probably for the person who's killed, that this event happened with this cow, and then all of a sudden the cow's out there, and people are like telling stories about it. So they wanted to get rid of the animal to make that not happen. Says the Gemara, Zachar Minala. How do you know that a man who sleeps with another man is prohibited and gets skila? The Tanu Rabbanan, again, there's a braita that talks about that. Obviously, it's a pasuk. Ish, and we say prat lekatan again, excludes a minor. Asher yishkav et zachar, who sleeps with a male, bein gadol, bein katan. Whether that person is a gadol or a katan, we're going to get into later how young is not considered to be even an active bia. But for now, even someone below the age of 13 could be chayav. Not the person's not chayav. The person who slept with them is chayav, right? Because they did an act that's prohibited. So then the pasuk continues, mishkevei isha, right? The way you sleep with a woman. So what is that telling you? I mean, how else would a man sleep with another man? There's not really any other way. So it says, meaning besides anal intercourse. So magid lecha katuv, the Torah is telling you cheshtei mishkavot bisha. That in fact you would think of a man sleeping with a woman is only vaginal intercourse, and maybe anal intercourse doesn't count as bi'ah, and therefore you're not chayiv mita for that. The Torah is saying, no. The way you sleep with a man is also counted as the way you sleep with a woman, basically. Amar Rabbi Yishmael, we thought that the Torah is saying to you, the Torah sounds like it's saying, you slept with a man the way you would sleep with a woman, but in fact it's teaching you how you sleep with a woman, right? Because telling you that whenever the Torah says don't sleep with a woman, it doesn't just mean vaginal intercourse, it means even anal intercourse, as we learn from this drasha. Mot yum tu. And then the Torah says you died, doesn't say how. So we learn Beskila. Asmar Atomer Beskila, Mikol Mitot Amurot B'Torah. Nemar kan Tmeim Bam, but Nemar Bovi Yidoni Tmeim Bam, right? The Lima we've had many times. Ma Hatam by Oven Yidoni, it says Tmeim Bam, and it means Skila, Afkan Beskila. Okay, so that is the pasuk in Kiddushim that talks about the punishment for Mishkav Zachar, for a male sleeping with another male. Ask the Gemara, what about the Azhara? Top of Daf Nun Zayin Amabed. Onesh Shamanu, so that's the punishment. Azhara Minayin, where does it say don't do it? Talmud Omer, because it says, and this is in Achrimot now, Ve'et Zachar lo tishkav mishkavei isha to'evahi. So a man should not sleep with another man. It is a to'eva. It says where, but that only says the person who's again, there's the shochev and the nishkav, right? The one who's sleeping, the one who is, again, I'm not sure what the best verb is for it, but the shochev is the active person, let's say, and the shkav is the passive person, right? Not that's passive, but to use the terminology. But the Torah says don't do it. So how do you know there's a prohibition on the one who's the active, the shochev? How do you know there's a prohibition on the nishkav, right? Lamadnu asara l'shochev, asara l'nishkav minayin. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, this is the Tanakama, Rabbi Yishmael, we'll see, lo yiyeh kadesh mi b'nei Yisrael. It's a whole different prohibition. It says don't be a kadesh, which we usually mean to be a prostitute, to have intercourse either for money or when it's a prohibited way. And it includes even a man, right? So you would have thought maybe that a kadesh is only a woman, but if a man is the one who's being slept with, that also is a kadesh. It's also a prostitution. Ben Omer, because it says, Gam kadesh haya ba'aretz, asu kechola toevot hagoyim asher horish. And you see the word toeva. So you see that the word toeva is used by kadesh. The use toeva is used by male sex, and therefore we compare the subject, I guess, the one who's being slept with, as a kadesh. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That is what Rabbi Yishmael says. Rabbi Kiva says, I don't need another pasuk. Einot tzarich. You don't need a second pasuk to tell me that the one who is the nishkav is also prohibited against mishkav zachar. Why not? Because Harei Omer v'tzachar lo tishkav mishkavei isha, and instead of reading it lo tishkav, you can read it karibe lo tishachev. You can read it. Don't be the passive. Don't be the one who is slept with. So the word tishkav can also mean tishachev, and therefore or tashkiv. He says on the side that you shouldn't be slept with, basically, and that is a prohibition as well. So that is a man sleeping with a man. What about behema manala? In the next case, the Mishnah was sleeping with an animal. The Tanur Rabbanan, again, there's a Braita which goes through this whole thing. It's very similar to the one we just had. Says the Braita, ish pratli katan. Okay, excludes a minor, who's the person doing the act. A minor is never chayiv, right? Asher yitin shechavta bebehema, sleeps with an animal. That's an animal that's a ben gdola ben ketana. Doesn't matter the age of the animal. Mot yumat, you kill the person. Beskila, atomer beskila, mitot amura b'torah. Now it doesn't say dmehem bum by animal, so we can't use our classic dmehem bum to learn from Ovi Doni. However, nemer kan taharogu. It uses the word you kill them. V'nemer lahalan ki harog tahargenu. It says lahalan. Where am I? It says by mesit, right? It says by a person who convinces someone else to do avodah zarah. It says the word harog tahargenu. Mal halan beskila. There we know it's beskila. Torah says it's beskila. Afkan beskila. So that's how we know you get skila. Again, it says the Gemara the Braita lamanu onesh. That's the punishment, and you know that it's a punishment for the shochev, the one who does the act, right? Not in a case if a person was was acted upon, a nishkav. Onesh l'nishkav minalan. How do you know a punishment for the one who is slept with? Talmud Lomar. Therefore, it says kol shochev im behema mot yumat. It says again. This remember has nothing to do. This was in Mishpatim way back. Totally out of context of Achimot Kedoshim. It says anyone who sleeps with an animal will get killed. And we already told you, anyone who sleeps with an animal gets killed. So so it's an extra pasuk basically to say that not only if you're the shochev, but you're also the nishkav, an animal sleeps with you, so to speak, or you bring an animal onto you, then you're also chayav for mita, and that would include a woman as well, of course. Now, says the Braita lamanu onesh, so now we know that there's a punishment, ben l'shochev, ben l'nishkav, whether you are the one sleeping, the nishkav, but how do you know about azhara? What's the warning? Azhara minayin. Talmud Lomar, and that, of course, is the pasuk in Achrimot, which says, "Ubechol behema lo titein shechaftecha l'tamaba." With any animal, don't give your sleeping, right? Don't have sexual intercourse to be tamei. Lamanu azhara l'shochev. Now that only says shechaftecha, that if you're being the active person, so that is a shochev. Nishkav minayin. Again, we learned, says Rabbi Shmuel, Talmud Lomar lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. It says don't be a kadesh. And it says, Gam Kadesh Haya Ba'aretz, Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara is going to say in a minute, you're probably wondering, this pasuk it doesn't mean anything right now, because Kadesh, remember the way we learn from Kadesh by a man is that it uses the word to'eva. By an animal, it doesn't say that, right? So why in the world would the word Kadesh have any implication for a person who sleeps with an animal becoming considered a quote-unquote Kadesh or a prostitute? So we're going to say later that Rabbi Shmuel was just saying what he said before, but he really doesn't mean this, and he has a different source. So we'll get there. But Rabbi Akiva says, I say the same thing I said before. Einot tzarich, you don't need an extra source. Harei omer lo titein shechavtecha, which meant you're sleeping with, you're active, but you can read it, lo titein shechivatcha, don't be the passive. And so you can read it both ways. Now, what's the implication between, and this is weird to your question of does this really happen? What's the implication between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? Haba ala zachor, vehevi alav zachar. Let's say a person does both, right? They are both the nishkav and the shochev in one act, in one hella, right? They forget that there's a prohibition of mishkav zachor, and they do both. They are the mishkav and the shochev and the nishkav. And so do you bring two karbanot or not? So Rabbi Avo, says Rabbi Avo, different Rabbi Yishmael Chayiv Shtayim, because they're two different prohibitions. One is from lo tishkav, and one is lo yeh kadesh. Right, we said being the passive one is from being lo yeh kadesh. Divrei Rabbi Akiva eno chayev elachat. You only be chayev one chatat because they come from the same pasuk, right? Because he said the word tishkav means tashkiv, right? Lo tishkav, lo tishachev or tashkiv chadahi. It's all one thing, and therefore it would have an implication. Again, I don't know how common that would be, but it would have an implication for bringing one or two karbanot for being over both aspects of the prohibition. Now, the second wide line, the same question comes up with an animal. Habal habehema, a male who sleeps with an animal as the sleep, the nishkav, the shochev, and mevi behema alav, and is the nishkav with an animal. The same thing. Amar Rabbi Avo, the divrei Rabbi Shmuel chayiv shtayim. According to Rabbi Shmuel, you be chayiv two karbanot chatat because you're over two separate prohibitions. Chada milo titein shechavtecha, and chada milo yeh kadesh. And divrei Rabbi Akiva eno chayiv elachat. because shechavtecha shechivatcha chadahi. Okay, now that's what Rabbi Avo says. Abaya says what I told you before. Abaya Amar, no, that's a mistake. Afilo different Rabbi Yishmael nami inochayev alachat. According to Rabbi Yishmael, even when you talk about animals, right, and you're both the shochev, the nishkav, and the shochev and the nishkav, inochayev ela achat. Where am I? Enochayev elachat. Chiktiv loya kadesh begavriktiv. When it says loya kadesh, it's clearly talking about humans. It's not talking about animals, right? Ella says, okay, well then Rabbi Yishmael told me that's how he knows you're not allowed to sleep with an animal. So if it's not referring to animals, Ella, Rabbi Yishmael, Azhara nishkav binale. How does Rabbi Yishmael know that there's an azhara for being the nishkav in a relationship or in an act with an animal? Says the Gemara, you're right. Where he really learns it out is nafgalei from the pasuk of Kol shochev im behima mot yumat. It repeats it. And it says, Kol shochev im behima mot yumat, im eno inyan l'shochev, because we already know that, t'neo inyan l'nishkav. And afke rachman l'nishkav l'shon shochev, the Torah uses the word, remember we said this before, uses the word, why does it say, if it's referring to the nishkav, why does it say don't be shochev, right? Why does it say something that it doesn't really mean? It's to tell you, ma shochev, just like the active man, who's shochev with an animal, is onesh anash v'hizir. There's a punishment and a warning. Af nishkav anash v'hizir. So
Not
therefore,
in that order, right? First the warning, then the punishment.
it is true. Yeah, you're correct that
It's a
usually
little weird that it's like reversed.
it's usually the other way. And in Achrim Kedushim, it is that way. It is all the warnings. The Gemara, the Breita, if you notice, consistently talks about the onish before the Azhara.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. Says the Gemara now, one last case of this. We have more cases. Hanirva l'zachar v'hanirva l'behima. Let's say a person is the nirva, meaning they're the passive, right? They're the nishkav with both an animal and a person, another man, right? If he's male, and in behelamachat, meaning he forgot the mitzvot, he forgot that this is prohibited, and then he basically slept and was not the active person, but the passive person with an animal and with a man. So then, Amar Rabbi Avo, different Rabbi Akiva Chayiv Shtayim. According to Rabbi Akiva, those are two separate prohibitions. One is lo tishachev, chadam lo tishkav, sorry, which we read as tashkiv or tishachev, and chadam lo titen shechavtecha. But the different Rabbi Yishmael, Eino chayav ela achat. You'd only be chayav one because idim idim lo yel kadesh. According to me, says Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Yishmael, who quoted in the Breita is learning lo yel kadesh, tells you don't be the passive, participant in a male relationship or a male animal intercourse. Then they're both the same pasuk. So you'd be chayav only one karban. And again, Abaye said that's not really true. Rabbi Yishmael really didn't mean that. I feel a different Rabbi Yishmael, nami chayav shtayim, dichtiv kol shechevim behema mot yumat. The real source is not from lo yeh kadesh. It's from kol shechevim behema mot yumat, which is repetitive. Emeno inyan l'shochev, because we already know that from Kiddushim. T'neu inyan l'nishkav. And the Afker Achman and the Nishkav Lashon Shochev to tell you, Mas Shochev, just like the active, the one sleeping is Anash is here, Af Nishkav, Anash is here. Aval, says the Gemara, or 8 lines in the bottom, Haba ala Zachar, let's say you do all three. A man, sleeps with another man, and he's the Boel, and he's Hevi Zachar Alav, and he's the Nishkav with a man, and sorry, all four. Habal habehima vehevi behima alav in one helam. Again, the very far-fetched case, as you can imagine, right? So he forgets and he does all 4 acts inappropriately, right? Now we know it's inappropriate. Says the Gemara, Bain the Rabbi Avo, Bain the Abaya, Bain the Rabbi Avo, Bain the Abaya. Whether you go with Rabbi Avo's interpretation or Abaya's interpretation of Rabbi Yishmael, you'd be chayiv shalosh. You'd be chayiv 3, because there's definitely 3 different psukim. They disagree about what they are, right? One says that it's the 2 active psukim and the kadesh is the 3rd. That's Rabbi Avo. And Abaye says it's the 2 active psukim and it's the extra words of, The extra words of kol shochevim behima mot yumat that tells you the other 2, right? But that still would be basically, that kol shochevim behima tells you both the shochev with an animal and the nishkav with an animal, but that by
Man.
a man and a man there's 2, right? So that the male prohibition, shochev and nishkav are 2, because one is from shochev and one is from kadesh, right? The animal is the same, right? So there's only 3. And according to Rabbi Avo, the active ones are always different. So the shochev of an animal and a man are two, and the nishkav is the same of kadesh both ways.
Mm.
So you basically have three either way. And according to Rabbi Akiva, there's only two, right? Because he holds that this one pasuk tells you both. Rabbi Akiva chayiv shtayim, one for a man and one for an animal. Okay, again, very, very unlikely cases, far-fetched, but just sort of exposing how it means they learn it from the pasuk. Continues the Gemara now. That was a lot of words in a short time. But says the Gemara now, Tanu Rabbanan, right? It says, very interesting, and again, not very, hopefully not very practical, but some of the questions that come up now, which are, again, very unusual because we don't often think about sex this way, and we don't think about intercourse and what it means, is that if you recall, we learned in Kiddushin, which is very important, that there was an age for Bia, right? That below a certain age, well, again, not related to consent or anything like that, of course, right? But related to just the act. You call it an act of intercourse or sex or whatever we call it, or do you just say it's not? It's an assault, basically, right? So we talked, remember in Kiddushin, that a boy has to be 9 years old for his, penetration, basically to count as penetration. Not that he can't do it earlier, it doesn't count as a sexual act, right? And again, not for punishing him, not for any kind of consent, but for marriage, for example, or things like that. And a girl, we said 3, right? But that below the age of 3, it's not, again, it sounds like an assault, right? There's all kinds of other unpleasant things you can imagine.
Me too, but
yeah,
anyway.
but it's not considered to be sex, or I don't know if the word sex is the right word, but bia in the sense that it doesn't make marriage, you're chayv any prohibitions. So again, you wouldn't be chayv for sleeping with a relative if they were that age, as unpleasant and horrible as it is, right? So the question that we ask now is, what is about a zachar? What about a male? Do you view a man who's basically been or a boy who's the subject of intercourse as a woman in that equivalent, and it'll be 3 years old, or is it 9 years old, basically, right? What's the age? Again, not the easiest Gemara, but it's the Gemara. Tanur Rabbanan, 6 lines from the bottom. Zachar lo asubo katan gadol. By a male, we didn't make a katan. We'll see in a minute what this means, like a gadol, to be chayiv, right? To be chayiv if you sleep with them. But behema asubo katana kidola. By an animal, we did. Now, what does that mean? My lo asubo katan kigadol. Amar Rav, says Rav, what it means is that if a man sleeps with a boy who's less than 9, lo asu biat pachot mi ben tesha shanim ki ben tesha shanim. They didn't make less than 9 years old like above 9 years old. And you consider it to be not an act of bia. Again, assault it is, but not an act of bia. Shmuel said, no, it means even earlier. It means lo asu biat pachot mi ben shalosh shanim. You basically treat this boy like you would treat a girl in that regard, that kiben shalosh shanim, right? Now, what's the machloket? Rav Savar called ita b'shochev, ita b'nishkav, right? That you have to look at the perpetrator, put in this case, the shochev and the nishkav. Ma called leta b'shochev, leta b'nishkav. And so therefore, since we can remember, we don't consider a penal, action under the age of 9 to be anything. So we wouldn't consider it to be the nishkav under 9 to be anything, at least not sexual intercourse, and therefore not chayav for this prohibition. And Shmuel says, no, mishkavei isha ktiv. It compares it to sleeping with a woman, right? And just like by an isha, he doesn't finish that, but just like by an isha, the age is 3, so too by a man, the age would be 3. Let's read a little bit more. Tanya Kavati de Rav. There's a brayta that says, like Rav's way of 9 years old, Zachar ben Tesha Shanim v'yom echad. If you have a male, a boy, who's 9 years old in one day, top of Daf Nun Hey Aleph, Haba'al habehima, who then that boy sleeps with an animal, ben kedarka, ben shelo kedarka, or where am I? Yeah, Isha.
Yeah.
You would be chayav. Either way, you'd be chayav, and we're going to stop here. But basically, the way this supports Rava, right, is that it says that the main age here is 9 years old, whether the boy is the active one or the passive one in this case. So that's what Rava said, not like Abaye said it's 3. And again, hopefully not very practical. Tomorrow, pick up from the 3rd line of Darish Rav Nachman. So we'll stop there. Obviously, like I said, it's all sort of arises from the confusing psukim, and that's why it's really critical to go back if someone's going to review this and look at these psukim and discuss them all in detail. Yasher koach, everyone. Shavua tov.
Thank you.
See you next Motzei Shabbat.